Hi, Mitesh here. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to build a couple of virtual machines within Azure using PowerShell. We're going to create two domain controllers using static IP addresses. And we need to do this through PowerShell as it's not supported in the GUI this time. So if we look at our environment, we've got an Azure subscription set up. There's no virtual machines in there at the moment. But there are some objects, so I'll take you through those. So the first one is an affinity group, so that's just a label for objects that will be placed in a certain region, so I've chosen North Europe. We've also got some storage, so this is where your MC demo store, that'll be where your virtual machines are stored in the VHDs container here. Okay. And the third thing is the virtual network. So I've got a static VNet, I've just called it static VNet, and inside there I've got my virtual network configuration, which shows us the range of IP addresses I can use, which is here, and each subnet within that range. So each subnet I've chosen a subnet per machine, so that gives me a little bit of control over the IP addresses anyway. So for example, our first domain controller will be in DNS1, which our first IP address it would automatically give us is 0.0.4, and our second domain controller will be in the second subnet, DNS2, which would then give us 10.0.0.12. But because we're using static IP addresses, I'm going to set my own static IP to be 5 for this one and 13 for the second one. Now if I didn't do that, it would just give me 4 and 12 by default, and that's fine, but they don't guarantee that you'll get these IP addresses, so Microsoft recommend that you set up a static IP address for domain controllers and possibly other servers as well that you don't want to get a dynamic IP address for. So let's get started and look at the PowerShell. We'll go into PowerShell, we've connected to PowerShell, so you'll be able to see that how we do that from a previous post. Essentially it's just the get Azure publish settings file that will log you on and download the file for you, and then you import it into Azure PowerShell, and that will get you connected. So you tell the subscription you want to connect to. As long as you've got the files and settings downloaded, it will then let you select your subscription. Okay, so here we've got some variables for, say, my admin username, password, virtual machine names, my cloud service, an availability set which tells Azure to make this service highly available, and I've also got my virtual network here. Now this one tells it which image I want to use from the Windows Azure gallery, and this is saying I want to use a Windows 2012 R2 data center image, and I want to get the latest version of it. Here we select the subscription and my default storage container. Okay, so let's connect to our subscriptions. If I just select this text here, and that will go off and connect to my subscription. Okay, what we can also do is run a test, so we can test if a specific IP address has not been taken by anything else. So if we run this, hopefully that should work. Test Azure static VNet IP. Tell it which virtual network you're in, and it says is available true. So yeah, we know we can use .5, and that's what we put in our next script. So this next part builds up the actual parameters for the virtual machine. So that's where it gets its name from the parameters above. The image, Windows 2012 R2, size small, availability set name, subnet DNS1 as we saw earlier, and that's my static IP address, which is set as your static VNet IP address and the IP address I want to use. So as long as that IP address is available within that subnet, it should work. Okay, and then we say that's the admin username and password for the VM. We're also going to create a new data disk, non-cached, so you need to do this for all domain controllers within Azure, because the default OS disk has host caching enabled, and you don't want that because that could cause AD corruption, because you need to be able to write directly to the Azure blob storage into persistent storage rather than cache storage. Okay, so let's run this portion here that will go off and build my VM parameters, and this one, new Azure VM, tell it my cloud service name, which is DC Cloud Service, as we see up here. My affinity group, so that's my North Europe affinity group, and my virtual network. So note here that I can specify an affinity group for my virtual machine. I can also apply affinity group to my storage, but I can't do it to my network. So my network has been created as a North Europe regional network, they call it, not one that's assigned to an affinity group, because static IP addresses are not available with networks that are joined to an affinity group. They need to be regional networks. So if you've got a network that you want to use static IP addresses and also internal network load balancing, you need to have a regional network. At this point in time, they might, well, they say they will allow the static IP address and NLB to be available on affinity group networks as well, but at the moment you can't. And the only way to do it is through PowerShell. So if we look into here, we should now see our cloud service being created. So if we look in the cloud services, there's my cloud service, DC Cloud Service. So it's doing something inside there, and that will be deploying this virtual machine. So that's my machine, MC static DC1. So once that's created, we'll be able to go in to see the properties of that. We'll be able to see the availability groups, the disks, and the IP address, etc. Okay, so now it's running. That's provisioned, it's up and running. So let's just run the script to create the next VM, and then we'll come back to this one. So if we look at the second virtual machine, so this one's creating the second DC with the same settings as the previous one, same availability set and everything. Okay, set that up. Build the virtual machine, and now let's go back to the first one and look through the settings of that one. Right, so if we click on the virtual machine, click on dashboard, and we scroll down, we can see that is our cloud service name. So that's an internet routable DNS name that Azure gives us an IP address for that as well. So this is created at a cloud service level. Okay, and you would do that to get a group of machines together for internet network load balancing, as well as putting them in the same availability sets for high availability. Here's our IP address that we talked about. So in our script we told it we wanted to use .5. It's also given us our disk, so there's our data disk without caching enabled. Yeah. If we look at endpoints, we'll see by default it creates an RDP endpoint. So this is an RDP endpoint available over the internet for this cloud service, and this port will get you into this machine. So RDP is enabled by default on the machine itself inside Windows. Also this one, which is for remote PowerShell, which we're going to look at next. Now you can restrict these as well. If we manage ACL, so you can restrict these to just your network if you like. So anybody who tries to access it over the internet over an unrecognized address or a denied address, they won't get any response. Okay. And if we look at configure, there we can see it's a standard VM, a virtual machine size that equates to small in our script. Here is our availability set now. It's created our AV set, which we specified in the script, and it's also added the second machine to it right now. So that's our first one and our second one. So these ones are highly available, which means they're in separate racks on separate servers at all times. We can see that it's used my static virtual network, and also it's placed this virtual machine in subnet DNS1 as we specified. So if we go back to the portal virtual machines and look at static DC2, that's starting up now. If we look at configure, yeah, so it's the same, but this one is in DNS2. Okay, now we should be able to see the IP address of 13, which is the IP address we gave it. Okay, so it's in the same cloud service, internal IP address. So once we've got our virtual machines up and running, we need to be able to remotely PowerShell into those machines, so then we can run the DC promo script. So what we'll do, we'll run this tool, this script here, which is available on the internet at this address. So if we run that, it'll go off to that machine and download the certificate, which will then allow us to run remote PowerShell within that machine. Next thing we do is set up some credentials, or enter our credentials. So I use demo admin, enter that, so we'll save that. And then the first thing we need to do is format the drive. So remember, we added a second drive into that virtual machine, so that just shows up as a blank drive. I'll show you. So if we connect to this virtual machine, if we just do a connect, so we don't need to go in, this is just to show you what it looks like. Okay, so I've logged into the machine with the credentials I've specified in the script. So if I open this management, so we can see that extra disk is actually, let's cancel this. We'll see the disk has actually been provisioned here, but it's not initialized. So we'll run this script to initialize and format the drive and give it a drive letter of F. There's other scripts out there that can loop through all the drives. You may have multiple drives, but I'm just doing the one so I've specified here. I'm just going to find the first raw drive and format it as an F drive. So if we take a look inside that VM, I've refreshed that. Okay, we can see within our script now it's actually connected and it's actually formatting that drive for us. So we see now it's online, and pretty soon it will assign a drive letter. There we go, F drive. So now we can use that drive for our Active Directory database NTDS. So we'll leave that there. Again, we're not touching anything in here. This is just to show you. So we'll run that. So now we run a script to promote the domain controller. So we've got a script already, which is just kind of the same script that you'd run on-prem. So install the feature, Active Directory domain services, include the management tools, and we can see it's a new forest. And here's where I want to store my database. So we can see we've changed this to F. The domain mode is Windows 2012. The name demo.local, NetBIOS name demo, forest mode Windows 2012. Yes, install DNS, and the log and sysvol paths are also on the F drive. So that's pretty standard stuff. So what we'll do, let's call that. But what we're doing here is telling PowerShell to actually go and run that inside the virtual machine in Azure. So we've got the connection URI which we built up here from this script. Okay. And then we ran get Azure win URI, tell it the service name and which machine to connect to, and put it into the win rm URI variable. Passes the credentials through and runs that script, so we can see the installation beginning now. Okay, so it's popped up a dialog box for what is my safe mode administrator password, because that wasn't in the script. So I'll just put any password in there and it'll ask me to confirm that. So it's a bit more secure than actually leave it in the plain text file, so just make a note of what that is. Okay, it looks like it's completed. It's doing the DNS install now. Okay, so that's finished. So what we'll do first is get the certificate and run the second script. So let's run this for the second DC. format the drive on that as well, of course. And let's have a quick look at the second script. So this time we're running install Windows feature ADDS, include management tools, and this time we're doing add domain controller instead of add new forest. So add domain controller is a global catalog, so these are basically the default settings of when you add a new domain controller, except we've changed all the C drives to the F. Okay, demo.local, blah blah blah. So that drive's formatted now. Once that's done, we'll run this script. Once done, quick, run that script. And then let's log in to the first domain controller, which will have restarted. Log into that. So you'll notice I'm logging in using demo admin this time, rather than just demo admin by itself. It was last time, because that's our new domain. So that should connect. Yep, there we go. So we have got a 2012 R2 server in Azure, and we should now be able to see the Active Directory tool. Click on that. Let's open it. And then we can see our domain. Yep, that's our DC. So the second server's come up with a prompt. So this will be asking me which account do I want to use to join it to the domain. Okay. Save my password again. So let that complete. Okay, both domain controllers are now up and running. So if we look at the settings in static DC2, so we can see they're both in the same availability set, so they are highly available. And from the dashboard we can see our .13 IP address which we assigned it. And then if we look in Active Directory, we should see, yeah, we can see two domain controllers now. So now what we've got is a highly available new Active Directory service running on virtual machines in Azure, all created with PowerShell. Thanks very much for watching, and hope you found that useful.